In different periods of modern Chinese history, babies have carried very different meanings. Before the one-child policy officially ended in 2016, having an extra one could mean crushing fines, social punishment, and even forced separation. Children born outside the plan were something families feared, not celebrated. During China's decades of rapid expansion, however, children came to symbolize something else, an almost endless supply of young labor, the human fuel behind factories, exports, and so-called growth miracle. But today, that meaning has shifted again. As births plunge to record lows and China's population shrinks faster than ever, newborns have become scarce and suddenly profoundly valuable. So the question is the second most populous country on earth still able to reverse its demographic decline? How did China arrive at this moment, and why does it matter to the rest of the world? Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Ethan Liu. To unpack all this, today I'm joined by Yanxing Alice Zheng, Academia Sinica Institute of Sociology Professor and Research Fellow, Lake Liu, National Taiwan University Sociology Professor, and Daniel Goodkind, former U.S. Census Bureau International Program Senior Demographer. Welcome, all of you, to the show today. So to ground today's discussion in data, let's start with the official figures released by China's National Bureau of Statistics.
年末全国人口是14.0489万人，比上年末减少339万人。全年出生人口792万人，人口出生率为5.63%。
Just under 8 million births in 2025 marked the lowest level since the record began in 1949. The only comparable estimates date back to around 1738, during the Qing dynasty, when famine and severe subsistence crises were widespread and when China's total population was only about 1/10 of what it is today. Of course, living conditions have vastly improved over the past 3 centuries, yet uncertainty about the future has turned childbearing into a modern dilemma: to have or not to have.
就大家对于未来都是很不确定，不清楚自己的未来在哪里，对自己的未来也没什么信心，所以可能就不愿意生孩子吧。
你目前的经济状况可能只能
Our current financial situation is really only enough to support ourselves right now. If we had a child, the cost would be much
可
higher.
能会承担会更大的费用。
In the long run, we don't plan to have children. Raising a dog is already expensive.
So, Daniel, China's population is shrinking and its young people are reluctant to have children, but so what? Why should we care? How does it matter to the rest of us?
First of all, China has 1.4 billion people, so that's about 17% of the Earth's population of 8.2 billion. I think it's important to note that the United States, where I'm from, is the third most populous country with 350 million. And the gap itself between China and the United States is itself a population billionaire. So China has an outsized influence in the world economy no matter what, just because of that gap.
So what are some key turning points in history, if you look back, that made China what it is today in terms of its low birth rate or fertility rate?
Well, I would say that the key year was 1970. Under Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai, they put in ceiling birth targets for urban and rural areas. And that was followed by a program called Wan Xishao, later longer fewer, where they jacked up the age of marriage, they reduced the expectations of births. In urban areas, it was typically 2. In rural areas, it was typically 3. And they had various enforcements. But it wasn't until 1980 that China introduced the one-child policy, where almost all parents were limited to 1 child. But within 5 years, there were exceptions. So not everyone was limited to 1 child, even during the one-child era. But even those who were exempt from 1-child limits were still subject to 2-child limits or 3-child limits, and the marriage restrictions as well. Right.
So, Professor Liu, the one-child policy has ended. It's no longer that people are not allowed to have children. They somehow are voluntarily choosing not to. What are some reasons behind this collective decision?
The major reason, I would say, is that people are not like robots. You cannot just press a button and then reset everything, right? Now you said, oh, you now can have 2 children. You now can have 3 children. But it's not going to change the mindset. So this is like one major thing that you cannot reverse by just putting a policy. And the second thing is that when, along this argument of the quality of children, You can also think about when the quality of children are emphasized. More and more parents are invest into one child, and that investment is a huge investment, and that costs a lot. And when the cost of children increase, the fertility will be declined, right? And one consequence of one-child policy is that no matter whether the family want a girl or a boy, they have very high expectation on that child. And so children themselves, they want to excel. They want to have personal achievement. So the girls that were born in the millennium is very different from those of the parents' age who were born in the 70s or 80s. They receive higher education, and so there are more opportunities for them to land in a really high salaried job, right? In these kind of workplace, mothers usually suffer. They suffer from they might need to cut back the job, or that they will have to quit the job altogether. Because men, in general, are less gender egalitarian in terms of their attitudes.
You talk about this phenomenon, can we say that it's kind of unique in Asia or China, because over the past few decades, we've seen tremendous economic development. So in the meantime, females are expected to be a major force in the workforce. But in the meantime, they're also expected to be the traditional child bearer in traditional families, right? Do you think women in China or Asia as a whole are kind of get caught in this dilemma?
Yeah, definitely. This is not just a China phenomena. Even in Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, women are still the major, caregivers. No matter whether it's caregiving for the children or for the elderly people. That also, create a lot of burdens on women. And at the same time, they want to, achieve. So the competing devotions really affect, their choice of having births. Yeah.
So in addition, building on what Professor Liu has just said, Professor Zheng, in addition to this gender roles, or the women has to play different roles in at work or within the family, do you think marriage also plays a role too? Because I know in Asia, it's highly bound with childbearing, right? Between marriage and childbearing.
Yeah. At least in East Asia, well, in most of Asia for sure, there's a very close linkage of marriage and childbearing. And the fact that from 2013 to 2024, total marriage counts per year dropped from more than 13.5 million down to around only 6 million. It's more than halved. That doesn't bode well for fertility rate, because once people get married within a year or two, the first birth will arrive. So that the fact that marriage has dropped so much, that's part of the reason why we see there's a very strong dip in fertility rate in China. So marriage is definitely plays a significant role.
So Professor Zheng, do you think it's it's just another bad year for China, or do you think it's a long-term or even potentially irreversible trend?
It's definitely a long-term change towards fewer marriages and lower births. Once it hit to the level of 1 or less than 1 child per woman for the period total fertility rate, there's a high chance that it's irreversible.
So there's no precedent of success
Well, I think the best we can hope is that they dip down and then it stopped declining, and then for the much smaller marriage cohort or women's cohort, they have to have way more children. Let's say 3 or 4 kids on average for those populations to start to increase again. But that's not an easily foreseeable future, I think.
Okay. So China's population is shrinking. Some people are worried about their future, but birth numbers are only part of the story. To understand the full demographic picture, we have to look at the deaths as well. Since 2022, China has entered what demographers call natural population decline. Deaths now outnumber births, and from there, the math is straightforward. China's population has now been declining for 4 consecutive years, resulting in the loss of more than 7 million people, roughly the population of a mid-sized city. And that is why China is now trying to reverse the trend with a sweeping set of pro-natalist policies, including direct cash subsidies, longer parental leave and childcare support, tax breaks, housing incentives, and efforts to reduce the education and childcare costs. Some local governments have gone even further, offering monthly payments for second and third children. So Daniel, so in terms of these pro-natalist policies, according to your observations, how effective have they actually been?
I don't think they've been particularly effective, and they haven't been very effective everywhere else that they've been pursued. China's not the only country to try to raise birth rates. France and Sweden are two other countries which attempted to do it. At best, these programs have raised fertility by about 1/10 of one birth. And they're extremely expensive. So it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars even to get that. So for countries that are concerned about low birth rates, they might consider, instead of trying to raise the birth rates, they might use that money to invest in social security systems or other things, directly mitigating the impact of aging.
So you are saying that those money or those budget hasn't created any concrete or like significant changes?
No, it hasn't.
So why did the government, like across the world, still do that?
Well, there are other reasons why you might want to have extended maternity leave. Certainly, those are popular. Those are things that they might want to do anyway. But in terms of the demographic impact, it doesn't have a huge impact in increasing birth rates.
Okay. So Professor Liu also talked about in the beginning of the show that raising a child is a huge investment, right? According to the figures I have here, it takes not just a village, but $75,000 to raise a kid until the age of 18. It's a huge investment, not to mention the cost opportunities and the risk the mothers or parents take when raising a child, right?
Why is it that expensive? The first thing is that China is super competitive. Within the education system in China, it's very competitive. And the parents have to invest a lot of money in order to prepare the child to get into the job market. Education system first, and then the job market, right? So that is a long-term investment. So just now your statistics go up to 18. But if, for people in China, raising a child is more than 18 years of investment.
Higher education, right?
Right. They have longer education. Like some of them has to receive education in Western society. It is almost like a prerequisite now. For middle class parents to send the kids to overseas, to America or to Britain, right, to receive education, and plus. Think about the high housing price. So they prepare the child with the housing. They also need to prepare the child.
Down payment for that.
Right, the down payment. And also think about if they need to get married, you have the bride price and the dowry that is expensive. And if they unfortunately cannot get a standardized employment, good job, right, they need to have some money for startups. So these kind of investment is actually really, really long term when you think about that.
So Professor Zhen, China is not only shrinking, it's also aging rapidly, right? With over 300 million people already aged 60 and over, and the number is projected to be over 400 million by the mid-2030s, right? So what kind of impact does that create for maybe young people or working class in China right now or in the near future?
Well, all the typical things or symptoms you can imagine will take place. You get a smaller workforce and also fewer young people in the labor market competing for jobs with maybe some senior people. And there's going to be high dependency ratio because of the ever-growing large elderly population. So all of these are going to weaken their economic competitiveness. So it's like things like that. Yeah.
Okay. So that reminds me of this metaphor of the sandwich generation, like the working class, when the middle class are kind of get caught in between. Maybe the economic situation deterred them from having children, but with fewer babies are born, maybe the economy becomes weaker and their burden for the elderly becomes even heavier. Can you say that? So, yeah, Daniel, what's your observation?
Well, I guess I'm less concerned about low birth rates than other people, it appears. I'm thinking out into the future and where we're going to be going. And I'm thinking about how the Chinese government may be trying to spin all these numbers. If you go back to 2006, they claimed that there were 400 million births that were averted by the the program. Sometimes they said it was one-child policy, sometimes they said the whole program. And they kept repeating that statistic through 2016. But since then, the 400 million has disappeared in all the official pronouncements. They don't talk about it any longer because they don't want to remind people that its super low fertility is in part due to its own program. But looking into the future, I'm thinking about AI and artificial intelligence and putting people out of work, causing unemployment all around the world. I can envision maybe 10 or 20 years from now that the Chinese government might say, well, look at the other population billionaire, look at India, and look at the unemployment situation there. We'd like to thank those parents in China who made sacrifices on behalf of the nation, but now you should thank us, the Chinese government, for having put this program in place because unemployment is much lower. So that's my long-term, we don't see it yet, but nobody really knows where AI is going.
So are you suggesting that maybe the primary goal for now or in the near future is not raising the birth rate, or it will not be our concern any longer in the near future, hopefully?
I think, as other panelists have pointed out, I don't think we can do anything about it. So the best thing we can do is to sort of prepare for what the results are going to be, and that's in terms of addressing Social Security and the welfare of the elderly, because we can't do anything else.
Yeah, and plus you don't really know how automation and robotics can sort of make up some of the loss due to low birth rates. If it's sort of being compensated by these advancements in technology, maybe the shortage of labor force is not as severe as we thought. But on the other hand, you do have a shrinking tax base, and that probably is not easily fixable by advancements in technologies and automation. So there are pros and cons.
Okay. Professor Liu, what's your take on this? Are you more on the optimistic side, or do you think that's past the point of a reversal?
Well, actually, I think it takes a lot of effort if you want to reverse the situation. But in general, I would say that, what China is doing is not quite effective. And in addition to the incentives that you talk about in raising births, actually, they are doing something that is very similar to the time during the one-child policy. There are reports saying that women were called by the local officials to ask about the menstrual cycles, to ask about private questions, like, when are you going to have children? When are you going to marry? That kind of questions, the local officials are doing that. In the past, during the one-child policy, actually, it was done in the factories and also in some 居委会, like home ownership, kind of the neighborhood leaders, right? So it's quite similar. I'm actually more worried about how they intrude people's privacy. And another thing that I'm very critical about the three-child policy is the narrative that Xi Jinping was trying to make. Because if you remember 2 to 3 years ago, in the All China Women Federation meeting, he actually precisely said that the women should embrace family traditions, to go back to the domestic roles. And this is actually outrageous, because you are putting you're controlling women's body again. So I would say that instead of thinking about how to raise the fertility per se, why don't you think about some broader thing, like how do you want the future in order to have more babies, you have to also think about the future of children. If the future, that means it's the environment favorable to having children. If the environment, physical environment, social environment, political environment, if they are not conducive or not favorable for the future generations, no couples want to give birth. So if people are not happy, they do not want children. They don't want to give birth to the child which live in a place that is not happy. And think about the control of the Chinese government on the freedom, right? When freedom is restrictive, I just give birth to a child and then being controlled by the government, right? So what's the point?
Okay, so understanding China isn't just about China. It also serves an opportunity to understand ourselves. So demographers often talk about fertility using one number, TFR, total fertility rate, the average number of children a woman has over her lifetime. A TFR of about 2.1 is considered a replacement level. Think of it this way: two parents need roughly 2 children to replace themselves. So anything below that, population begin to age and eventually shrink. So zone 1 is what demographers call ultra-low fertility, a TFR below 1.0. So here, population decline becomes structural, and policy reversals are extremely unlikely. South Korea, Hong Kong, and Taiwan are already in this category. And zone 2 is the low fertility trap with TFR between 1.0 and 1.3. Birth rates are low enough to lock in long-term population decline, but still hard to lift despite policy efforts. This is where China sits now alongside Japan and Singapore. And zone 3 is low but manageable. Even countries long seen as high fertility societies like India and the Philippines are now sliding toward zone 3. So Daniel, it seems like much of East Asia are kind of stuck in this, I wouldn't say predicament or the situation, right? So do you think there's a way out, get out of the self-reinforcing cycle? Fewer babies, weaker economy.
As far as the demography is concerned about fewer babies, I don't see any way out of that because fertility rates are very low. You would have to have fertility above replacement for a considerable period of time. And also because fertility has been so low for so long, the traditional population pyramid, we called it a pyramid because it used to look like a pyramid, but with low fertility, it looks either like a rectangle or a tornado. So each year there are fewer and fewer mothers coming in. So even if birth rates go up, you're going to have fewer mothers who can have babies. So I see it almost inevitable that births will keep going down.
I think focus on young people's happiness is more important than aiming at when they get married and when they have kids. Obviously, young people, they are not fulfilling their life goal. They are not particularly happy and satisfied, and that's why they postpone all of these traditionally considered critical or important events of life.
So how do you define or measure happiness?
Well, it's like subjective well-being, and you can measure that from survey questionnaires. And well, the thing is, you know that in Taiwan, there's low salary problems among young people, and in China, there's high youth unemployment rate. In Japan and Korea, there are also other things, let alone the kind of fight between women and men, the gender conflict in these East Asian countries. That is referring to the fact that women in general in these rapidly industrialized countries, they tend to have much faster growth in their gender awareness, whereas men, they tend to be slower in adapting to women's new roles. So part of the reason why marriage is declining is also because people are eagerly looking for a suitable partner for marriage, but they simply cannot find one with same kind of aspirations of families.
When Professor Zheng talked about happiness, I think it's also about talking different priorities, right? Individuals have different priorities in their lives. I think for a society, for a country, it's also time to rethink their priorities, right? In this day and age of low fertility or low birth rate, right? So Professor Li, what's your take on this?
I think I mentioned a little bit about the future of children, right? Like how you create a favorable environment for children to live in. The physical environment, the social environment, and the political environment. It should be, if it is favorable to people, actually it benefits everyone, not only having children. So having more children will just be a side product. We also talk about the workplace or how intensive the work culture is. It is still the same in Taiwan. Taiwan people are really pro-work. We are very work-oriented people. And that also, really is not really very family-friendly. And that pushed a lot of people away.
Okay. So Professor Zheng, what's in your opinion, the most realistic takeaway from China's experience?
Well, I think government should think about how not to push too hard on certain policies because it tends to have unintended consequences. That's one thing I think I can say about what have been done in China. things have gone in directions that they didn't expect.
Okay, thank you, all of you, for being my guests today. We have to wrap it up there.
Okay.
So if you like our show, please subscribe to our channel to be notified when we upload a new video of Taiwan Talks. I'll see you next time.